Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in AP English, and we turn now in our study to Dante's Inferno, Canto 19. This is, of course, still in McGee, the third Bolgia, and this one is the simoniacs. Now, this is a strange word, so let's get it out of the way right away. Simoniacs are individuals within the religious group, the community of the Catholic Church, who use their power to gain wealth primarily and influence. So Dante now will become the reformer of the church. Now this is a really important canto because in many ways we're going to see Dante at his most courageous. And there will be some readers of this poem who will in fact be offended by the fact that Dante is going to place popes in hell. I think more importantly though is this reality. Dante had a certain kind of view of what the Catholic Church should look like, and he believed that there was something fundamentally wrong. And the trending of Florence towards greed and avariciousness was as well happening, he felt, towards it with the Catholic Church. Now think about your dates. We're in 1300. In 1400, Chaucer dies, having written, of course, Canterbury Tales but not finished it. But we've already studied our Chaucer, and especially his attack on those three institutions of stability, as we call it. Of course, no question, the church, but as well the patriarchy and class nobility. Go back and look at our lectures on learnstrong.net there. One more thought, though. Think about this. If Dante puts his poem in 1300 and Chaucer dies in 1400, in 1517, on the 31st of October, that monk in Wittenberg, Martin Luther, who wanted to remain a Catholic all his life, he had no interest in starting a new movement. He just simply wanted to do the very thing that Dante wants to do, reform. Of course, reform is a dangerous project, right? Some have argued, of course, that Jesus Christ was a Jew trying to reform Judaism. Of course, we know what Gautama Buddha tried to do in reforming Hinduism, and notice that in both of those cases, a new movement was spawned, just like with Luther. Dante, of course, the humanist, Dante, really in many ways, the Promethean Renaissance man before really we talk as much about the Renaissance. We call Dante a product of the Middle Ages, but he, like most great poets, is way ahead of his time, seeing way ahead of his time. Now, if you haven't been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, I very much suggest that you do that in the AP folder. Find our comments, especially starting with Homer's Iliad, Odyssey, and Virgil's Aeneid. Going to be hypercritical for this study again, all the way up and including our study of St. Augustine's Confessions, that remarkable autobiography, that spiritual autobiography, and in many ways, of course, Dante is borrowing heavily from that idea. Now, we have given review lectures over the first 18 cantos. Let's review those really quickly, right? In Canto 1, as we said, we are on the 7th of April, 1300, Good Friday. Dante the Pilgrim is 35 years old, lost in a dark wood. Virgil has to come and help him. Canto 2, Virgil tells him, Beatrice is the one who sent me. Canto 3, the inscription over hell, abandon hope, all ye who enter here, and the uncommitted. Canto 4 is Limbo, Circle 1, where the unbaptized pagans are. Homer is there. Obviously, Virgil and Aristotle are also there. Cantos 5, 6, and 7, the circles of the incontinent, as we consider them, those who didn't have the will, the sustained will, to be able to stay away from certain kinds of sins. In Circle 2, we have the jacked lovers. Dido is mentioned, but more particularly, Francesca gives her report of what happened with Apollo. In Canto 6, we have Circle 3, the gluttons, and Chaco making his prophecies about Florence. We're going to get similar kinds of observations being made here in Canto 19. In Canto 7, we have Circle 4, the prodigals, those who couldn't hold on to a dime, and the avaricious, those who never let go of a dime. They're pushing those stones against each other and they can't communicate. And as well in Canto 7, we have Circle 5, the Styx, more particularly the wrathful and the sullen. They can't speak. In Canto 8, Pelagius will take them across the Styx, and Philippe Argente is going to do his nasties. Dis is where they arrive, but they can't get in. In Canto 9, the gates of Dis, the city of hell, is opened by an angel, and they enter Circle 6, which is the heretics, that is to say, the non-believers, the ones who never could decide that this was the right thing to do, even after they knew it was the right thing to do. Christian practice, in other words. In Canto 10, we have Dante's really important conversation with Farinata and Cavalcante. In Canto 11, we're with Virgil giving us a map of the rest of hell, as I've told you, predicated on his understanding of Aquinas and Aristotle. That's a really important canto, I think. We begin with the violin in Canto 12. Circle 7 is divided into 3 categories, or rings, or rounds. In round 1, we have the mentor and the centaurs. Violin against neighbors, this is Phalation, the river of blood. In Canto 13, Circle 7, ring 2, we have the violin against self, that's the suicides and the talking trees. In Canto 14, Circle 7, ring 3, the violin against God, these are the blasphemers. Capinos is there as a Promethean-like character. In Canto 15, Circle 7, ring 3, we've got the violin against nature, as Dante called it. Never mentions the word sodomy or sodomites, homosexuals, and yet sexual perversion is here. However, Bruni de Latini is the one that Dante speaks with, and he speaks so reverentially to him that we begin to wonder, really, is this actually a circle of sin? And in Canto 16, Circle 7, ring 3, 3 more sodomites from Florence will have a conversation. And the tremendous amount of respect that Dante shows as Dante the Pilgrim, and quite frankly, Dante the poet as well, makes us wonder what exactly is going on here. In Canto 17, we have Circle 7, ring 3. One more time, the violin against nature. These are the users. There is no talking here other than a sticking out of a tongue and being nasty. And then they ride Geryon down into the Circle 8. There again, it's Malabauge, the circle of simple fraud. And here, in Bolge 1, we have this, in Canto 18, we have the panders and the seducers, and then we have that graphic image in Bolgia 2 of the flatterers, those who in their life spit out poop, and in their death and afterlife they swallow poop. It's a grotesque image. Now, in Circle 19, in Canto 19, Circle 8, Bolgia 3, we turn to the Simoniacs. Now again, the hope is that you're reading this material on your own and using me. I've had students that say it actually gets easier to read Inferno now once we enter into the 8th circle. I think some of that is because of the dynamism of the word pictures. Dante the poet is having a good time, I think, creating these grotesque word pictures. We're going to see a few more of these. Our learning theory, of course, has to be reiterated, the connecting of new information to old information in meaningful ways. And we do that in our annotative process, of course, by asking 3 guiding questions. What does the text say? Summary. What does the text mean? 2A, messages, themes. 2B, we're working at the rhetorical level with symbolism and irony, and Dante as poet, as politician, we're going to see a lot of that here, and philosopher or theologian, we're going to see a lot of that here as well. Finally, we'll ask at level 3, how can I relate to this information in meaningful ways? At 3A, how can I relate to all the other texts that we've studied in AP, starting, of course, with Iliad and Odyssey and Aeneid? And then finally, how can I relate to this information personally? I hope, if we're doing anything, if this is a classic work of literature, it's not because I call it or some other person calls it a classic work of literature. It's because you find some reason to want to identify with something that's going on here. Again, we are the stories we tell and retell, the stories we accept or the stories we reject. There may be the case that a good number of you will reject a good amount of the stories of this text, and yet you have to know the text to reject it. Do you got me? And even if you reject it, a whole lot of people don't. Let's think about, for example, the way Dante has serious problems with the institution of stability of his day, the Catholic Church. A brief summary now of Canto 19. We are now in Bolgia 3, the Simoniacs, and the corrupt religious, if you will. Okay, we're familiar with this from our study of Chaucer's Pardoner, especially the friar and the Sumner and the Pardoner, all kind of in that same group, right? We'll have Dante with a pope that's never actually identified, Pope Nicholas III. He was a pope from 1277 to 1280. And they're stuck in these like baptismal things where their heads are down and their feet are sticking up and their feet are on fire. Again, every time we see fire being used, it usually has something to do with non-believers, those who have done something horrendously terrible towards the church. Dante clearly is writing a devoutly religious poem, and yet is willing to critique the very religion he wishes to somehow prop up and help. Nicholas III will say to Dante the Pilgrim, Boniface, is that you? Boniface gets the dubious, really dubious pat on the back of constantly being referenced. We've gone through this already. Dante, the poet, has serious problems with Boniface. He believes Boniface VIII is the reason why he ended up in exile and the like. Then we got Dante giving a sermon. It's pretty powerful protest theology, and a whole lot of what he says is exactly what will be said in those 95 theses that the monk Augustinian monk Luther is going to hammer up on a door in a church in Wittenberg in 1517, a few years later, a couple hundred years later. Let's turn now just to the poem and enjoy both the language as well as the protest theology that's involved here. We begin with a series of odes, as if somehow Dante the poet realizes that he is about to go on a tirade that will begin with "Oh." Now we saw, interestingly, this "Oh, Tuscan" from Farinata when he interrupted Dante. Here, this is Dante the poet saying it. And we're going to begin with a character out of the New Testament in Acts 8, verses 9 through 24, Simon Magus, who tried to buy spiritual power from Peter and John. And therefore these are called simoniacs because of the Simons. "O Simon Magus, and O you wretched crowd of those who follow him, and prostitute in your rapacity the things of God, which should be brides of righteousness. You turn God's church into a whore. Later it will be the whore of Babylon." In fact, this is one of the first times this actually gets used as a criticism and critique of the Catholic Church, and it's done by Dante. To get silver and gold, that's why you do what you do, in other words. It is time the trumpet sounded for you. Whoa, so here it is. It's interesting that the Florentine readers who are worried they may end up in one of these will go, okay, at least he's going to jack on the religious for a while and not on, businessmen or whatever. Here we go, the jack on the church and the religious. It is time the trumpet sounded for you. The third pouch is where you are put. Now, we were at the next tomb. And again, those first 6 lines, it's almost like Dante the poet is saying, hey, listen up, you religious people. That is to say, religious here, not meaning you are a religious person, that is to say you go to church. No. When we use the term religious, it's the way we use the term when we were talking about our Chaucer and Canterbury Tales. To be a religious means that you are affiliated with the church in some kind of position of power and authority, and therefore you are responsible. You'll remember that the 2 most important things is no hanky-panky, you're supposed to be celibate, and you got to be poor. You can't care about money and power. And of course, Dante's going to make the observation already. Yeah, I'm a little worried about that second one in the money and power thing, right? Now we were at the next tomb, having ascended to where the ridge hangs over the Fosses' middle. And then he comes back to another ode. "O supreme wisdom, your mighty art is extended through heaven, on earth, and in the world of evil. And with what justice is your power assigned?" Exclamation point. We're back to the notion of justice. And here, Dante says, in the afterlife, religious who have misbehaved are treated fairly. They are given their just deserts. Whoa. Of course, if you're a priest reading this, you're all of a sudden going to sit up and say, oh no, what is this crazy poet up to now? And now Dante, "I saw that the livid stone which lined the channel, both walls and floor, was full of holes, all round of an equal size. They seemed to me not any wider or smaller than those designed for the baptisms in my fair San Giovanni." Actually the church where Dante himself was baptized. "One of which many years ago I broke to save one drowning there, and let this be my seal to clear the matter." Now, scholars have debated about what this is all about. Apparently, Dante in his own life, there was some man who was drowning, he says, in a baptismal, and he broke the baptismal, which was kind of considered an irreverent act, and Dante here wanting to make the point, I am not irreverent, and when I broke that baptismal, I was not being irreverent. Of course, it's an interesting symbol. Why he would bring this up, I think Dante the poet recognizes powerful symbolism here. In the same way that I broke that baptismal to save a drowning man, I will now break a different kind of baptismal to save a whole lot of drowning people, because these religious are inappropriate. From each hole, now these baptismal holes, stuck a sinner's feet and legs. They're upside down. In our study of Hamlet, we will have Hamlet who will say that he is going to kill his stepdad Claudius, who has murdered his father Hamlet. And he says, I'm going to trip his heels so they stick towards heaven. And of course, Shakespeare's playing the game of Dante, right? A sinner's feet and legs, he says, from each hole stick up. The rest of him, from the calf up inside, they twitched and they shook, because the soles of both feet were aflame. So you get the feet on fire. So violently it seemed their joints could burst rope or snap weights. And then we get this interesting simile. As flames on oil will skim across the surface, so here, the quick fire coursed from heel to toe. Now in a little bit, we're even going to get references about the special scarlet shoes that popes wear. Dante is definitely wanting us to focus on the feet. And we come back to that image earlier of the man of Crete. You'll remember the old man of Crete that has clay feet. And all of a sudden, we're thinking differently with that word picture. This is the genius of Dante. He will take a word picture and he'll come back to it in very, very subtle ways. It's brilliant. Master, I asked, tell me, who is that one who seems to squirm the worst and to be sucked by the reddest flames? And he, if you desire for me to carry you there, by that blank bank sloping down more gradually, then you can speak with him directly and hear from him about himself and his misdeeds. In other words, Virgil says, I'll carry you down. And I like what pleases you. You are my Lord. You know I follow where you will lead. You also know the things I leave unsaid. Now, you could argue this is a form of flattery to Virgil, but I don't think so. I think Dante the pilgrim is saying to Virgil, I trust your instincts. If this is the one you want me to talk to, this is the one you want me to talk to. By the way, notice the genius of what Dante is doing. Same thing Chaucer did when he uses some kind of scaffolding. So Chaucer goes after, for example, the patriarchy, but he doesn't do it directly, he does it through the wife of Bath. Go back to those lectures in our LearnStrong.net folder, the AP folder. In the same way here, notice it's Virgil who's the one who picks this one out. It's not Dante, and certainly Dante the poet is able to say, hey, Virgil is the one that went to this guy. Well, we'll get to this guy, who this guy is. Then, we came into the fourth dike, where its sides sloped down. We descended to our left, always going to the left, with the exception of the 2 times to the right, and stood upon its narrow, perforated floor, my master not releasing me from his side until he reached the hole of that sufferer whose legs thrashed out such sorrow. And I began, oh, another oh. Notice it's again and again. It's almost as if Dante the poet is saying, oh, this is just terrible. Terrible what's happened to the church. Oh, miserable soul, whoever you are, planted here like a fence post upside down. Speak if you can. I stood, and then a powerful simile. Dante's in fine form in Canto 19. I stood as does the friar who has confessed a vile assassin, head down and tied in place, who calls him back to defer death for a little while. Now, all you got to do is know one little thing about this. If you are an assassin, then you were killed by being suffocated to death in your own tomb, face down. And so here, Dante says, I was like taking the confession, like Dante says, I was like a priest. Note the irony of this, because who he's standing in front of here is actually Pope Nicholas III. This is a pope in hell, and Dante uses a simile like, it's like I was about to give confession to an assassin. But he doesn't know. And by the way, Pope Nicholas III is never actually mentioned here. It's rather a different pope. Pope Nicholas hears the voice of Dante, and he cries at line 47-48. Boniface, are you already standing there? Already standing there? He repeats it. The writing lied by several years. There was a rumor that Boniface had been told that he would die in 1303, and here we are in 1300, right? Boniface, by the way, in 1294 came to the papacy. Are you so soon replete with all that getting for which you weren't afraid to take the beautiful lady, the church, by deceit, and then to do her outrage? In other words, you raped the church. Boniface, oh, you're here early. I didn't expect you for a while longer. Whoa. Now, just to point out, Boniface's name is mentioned, although, again, Pope Nicholas III is not. And it's Pope Nicholas who condemns Boniface. Notice, so we've got Dante the poet having Pope Nicholas III talking to Dante the pilgrim saying, oh, was that you? Notice, Dante the pilgrim says, I became like those who, feeling laughed at, hesitate, not comprehending what's been said to them and helpless to reply. Put this in your notes at 3A. Later, we will do a little text by George Orwell called Shooting an Elephant, where he will say, as a policeman in Burma, he hated the idea that he would be laughed at, and for that reason, he made a really tragic decision. Here, notice the interesting, it's like I felt somebody was laughing at me. I couldn't even speak. I didn't know what to say. The fact that he had thought I was Boniface, and then to realize, oh, Boniface the Eighth is coming to hell. Wow. Then Virgil said, answer him quickly. Say you're not him, not who he thinks. I spoke as I was bid, at which the shade squirmed hard with both his feet. Then, sighing and in a mournful voice, replied, what do you ask me then? If you were brought down from the bank to discover who I am, then know that I was vested with the great mantle of power. Again, Pope Nicholas III. He was Pope, by the way, from 1277 to 1280. A son who truly came out of the she-bear from the Orsini family. Again, see, Dante can do this kind of thing because his readers understand. This is, I think, what T.S. Eliot meant the most when he said that Dante is the most specific or individual of poets and the most universal of poets. I mean, think about the ways in which what we're about to enjoy is what Chaucer will do a few years later and Luther will do later, and of course Calvin, Zwingli, and the rest of those protesters of the Protestant movement. A son who truly came out of the she-bear. I longed so much to advance the cubs, nepotism, that filling my purse was my great aim. And here I have pursed myself to my expense. Notice the brilliance of the use of the word purse. Purse in two ways. Purse economically, and purse in that he's in the purse or hole in the ground upside down, right? Beneath my head, the Pope continues, are souls who preceded me in simony, mashed flat and squeezed through dense layers of fissured rock like pressed fossils. In other words, there's other popes down below me, and the suggestion here is that when Boniface shows up, I will be pushed down there and his feet will be the ones sticking up. I too, he says, shall I push down in turn when that other, Boniface, one has come. My abrupt question assumed that you were he, you think? But already longer is the span of time I've been cooking my feet while planted reserve than he, feet scarlet, will be planted the same. For then a lawless shepherd of the West will follow him. Here's Clement V, right? He died. This was a Frenchman. He died in 1314. He had negotiations with Philip the Fair of France, and probably.